call upon Mufti Ismail sir to come and deliver his words of wisdom and his lesson to us all, so we can all benefit, inshallah.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الذي هدانا إلى الصراط المستقيم والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الأمين وعلى آله الطاهرين وأصحابه الكاملين. أما بعد، أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. لقد خلقنا الإنسان في كبد. وقال تعالى: وابيضت عيناه من الحزن فهو كظيم. وقال تعالى: وقالوا الحمد لله الذي أذهب عني الهم والحزن. صدق الله العظيم. وقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم: من يرد الله به خيرا يصب منه. Dear respected brothers, elders, ulama, mothers and sisters listening at home, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. First and foremost, I'd like to thank everybody for making it to today's program. MashaAllah, it's a Sunday evening. I'm sure many brothers had commitments. And one of the reasons it's very pleasing to see so many men in this program. When I intended to do this program first, I did it specifically for men. Simply because I'm sure many of you will know mental health issues are rising in men. Suicides are more common in men. And sadly there's not enough education in masjids, in madrasas, in schools about this. And secondly, a lot of men are in denial. So it's nice to see, mashallah, that a lot of you have made it, and I'm sure there are many brothers and sisters in and around town as well listening online. I generally like to say whenever I do a talk, there's usually three categories of people: the prisoners, the passengers and the participants. The prisoners are usually those who've been forced to come, and then the passengers are, well, I came for Asr, so might as well sit now. And then the participants, inshallah, which you will be, is those who will engage in the program. And hopefully there will be a bit of engagement, so you don't fall asleep, I don't fall asleep. So on the topic of engagement, when I say mental health, what does it mean to you? Anybody? Show of hands. I'm sure it doesn't mean silence. Anybody, what does mental health mean? Anything. There's no right answer, there's no wrong answer. Sorry?
How you feel?
How you feel? Okay, very good. How you feel? How a person feels. Anybody else? Trauma. Very good. Trauma. Anybody from the back? Loneliness. Very good. Okay, like I said, there's no right, wrong answer. Whatever it means to you, that's what mental health is. Okay, so inshallah today we will go through a few things about mental health. First and foremost is the history, the beginnings of mental health. We'll also go through the Islamic perspective. A lot of people think that Islam's got nothing to do with mental health. There's a lot of myths. For example, if you have mental health issues or depression, it's because your iman is weak, kamzor iman. So we'll look into the seed of the prophets who suffered some of these things as well. The myths generally regarding mental health, and some of the myths men particularly have. And then if we have time, inshallah, maybe some of the signs of mental health, a bit about some of the types of mental health. So the beginnings of mental health, first and foremost, in the Western world began with the immigrants. Many people started migrating to the Americas, Europe, United Kingdom. A lot of these people who came, they didn't have much. They suffered from poverty. They literally had the clothes on the back, and many of them were Irish, black people, Asian people. If you ask your parents or grandparents if they're alive, many of them will say they came with a suitcase which is probably empty, or one pair of clothes. Now when you suffer from poverty, you can go through many things which leads to mental health. So this was the beginnings of mental health in the Western world. And there were three types of, you could say, mental health, three types of counseling they looked into. The first foremost was career counseling. So what they would do, how they would treat these people, there was no form of prevention. How they began is just treating people who suffered from these issues. So one of them was simple way of career counseling. They looked at what talents a person had, what skills you had. So for example, if you're very good with your hands, they put into plumbing, engineering. If you were good with other things, they put you in IT skills, they put you in admin skills. So this was first and foremost type of counselling, which was career counselling. Inshallah, if there is space, if brothers can move a bit forward, I know it's already quite tight, inshallah.
Can I just request everyone to squeeze as much as
If you can, there's a bit of space at the front as well, so brothers at the front come
kind of
forward.
the left
Inshallah, I know it's quite warm as well.
Is there any space from the
Jazakallah.
side?
Jazakallah coming forward, inshallah. Hopefully you can squeeze another 2-3 in. So the first was career counselling, which I mentioned. They will look at a person's skills and talents. Secondly, they will look at school counselling. For example, children who are suffering from mental health issues, who are suffering from trauma, for example. It would be a simple case of sending to the head teacher's office, but it was more complex issues. But you're talking maybe 50, 60, 70 years ago where they didn't deal with it accurately, precisely. And the third was mental health counselling, where they were dealing with actual issues in terms of phobia, trauma, people who are suffering anxiety, for example. And with regards to career counselling, was one of the best forms of counselling because it got people into jobs. Now you have to understand, in this country, in a lot of the European countries and Americas, a lot of mental health issues arose after the two big wars, World War I, World War II, because there was a lot of lives that were lost. So first and foremost, a lot of lives were lost. So women who were left behind, who were widows, children who were left behind, they suffered from anxiety, depression, mental health issues. So one of the best ways was to get the women out into work, and this is where women started working in large numbers. It was because of World War I, World War II, we lost a lot of men. And it reminds me of a famous quote of Cresswell, who said one of the best cures of mental health is getting a job, keeping yourself busy. In some of the work I do, I see this as well, where somebody who's employed, they get better very easily. Whether it's spiritual healing, whether it's Islamic advice they want, whether it's counselling. I've always noticed, I'm not saying people who are unemployed don't get better, but in terms of quicker healing, people who have a job, it's simply because you have a routine. So if we give you an exercise to do, we give you something to do, whether it's praying, whether it's salah, whether it's dua, the one who's employed will do it because they're in routine. Somebody who's not employed will wake up probably late afternoon, have their breakfast, and they don't have much of a routine. So again, it's something from a quote of a non-Muslim, Cresswell, but it also matches with the Islamic perspective. As we say, an idle mind is the devil's workshop. So we can see generally people who procrastinate, or people who are lazy and people who are laid back, it's because they don't have a routine. So as I mentioned, a lot of the issues with regards to mental health in the Western world probably started maybe around almost 100 years ago, and it was to do with the world wars. It's similar to some of the issues we saw in the lockdown. Yeah, when we had the coronavirus and the lockdown, a lot of the issues we saw were marital issues. A lot of people lost their jobs because some people were working from home and some people lost their jobs, and some people lost family members as well. So it reminded me, when I was thinking about how mental health issues started, it reminded me of the year 2020, and maybe some people had long-term COVID as well, so maybe issues carried on. Maybe somebody lost a husband or a wife, maybe somebody lost several members of their family, and there were people in Blackburn I know who lost their husband, a father, a grandfather, example. So their suffering, their trauma, their grief could have been maybe for a year or 2 years or even till now. But the symptoms, you could say, were very similar as to what happened after World War I, World War II, and as to what happened in lockdown. Now in 1946, there was an act that was passed which was called the National Mental Health Act. Now what this focused on is treating mental health. What it didn't really focus on is preventing it. And as we know, anybody who works in medical, pharmaceutical, you know, prevention is better than cure. In many things, not just medical things. So even in mental health, there was no real prevention. So this is one of the things which later, maybe in the 21st century, 2000 onwards, they focused on treating mental health issues, but also how to prevent it, inshallah, and hopefully, time permitting, that some of the issues will go through later on. Now why is it that in men, like I mentioned earlier, why is it men have so many mental health issues? Why are men not talking about it? Why do men find it difficult to talk? Why do men not go for counselling? Even going for counselling or male counsellors is very hard to find a male counsellor. Sometimes a man wants to talk to a man because he'll feel that he will understand him better because of the way we work. And sometimes A female will want to see a female, a woman counsellor. So inshallah, these are some of the things we will touch upon. So with regards to counselling, it involves a lot of psychology, it involves a lot of things about the brain, how your brain works. And how a man works and how a woman works, so I'm sure many of you will agree, it works very differently. Sometimes men, we like to bottle things up, we like to store it. And we think not talking about it is fine. Not talking about it is absolutely fine and it'll just go away. So we have to understand that with regards to the brain is a very complex organ, it's a muscle. And I remember one of the co-founders of Microsoft, he was once asked a question about the brain and he said, what do we know about the brain? How deep has research gone about the brain? And his answer was, we don't even know how the brain of a worm works, which is far smaller than a human brain. So let alone the brain of a human being, which is far complex. So for me to understand about the brain and everything about psychology, I don't think it's going to be sufficient to do it in an hour. But a bit about psychology, there's many types of psychology. For example, a simple example is when you go to a shopping store, whether you go to Tesco, Aldi, Lidl, where will you find they'll put the milk and bread, for example? Yeah? We've got some Asda workers here, mashallah. Where would you? Normally behind the store, at the end. Why? Second question.
You go through all the aisles.
You go through all the aisles and you look at the unimportant, unessential stuff, and you probably pick up a few donuts and chocolate and crisps, etc. Waste money, should we say, if it's junk food, but you probably realize that you didn't really need it, and then you'll get your bread and milk. Similarly, you'll also find when you get to cashier, what sort of things do you find where the conveyor belt is?
Chewing gum.
Chewing gum, very good. And chocolates and sweets and lollies and tissues. Again, things which probably your children may want, but not essentials. So that's their form of psychology, a very basic example of psychology. It's working on your mind that while you're waiting in the queue at the cashier, your child is going to say, Mom or Dad, I want a lollipop, or I want this drink, I want this chewing gum. And you're probably going to say, you've already had too much for this week, we'll get it next time. There's another example, it's not a very good example, but it's an example of a drug dealer. Yeah? Example of a drug dealer. How does a drug dealer psychology work? Anybody know? Might be good if you don't know. So the drug dealer, again, I don't run drug dealers, yeah? So in case you're thinking, a drug dealer sometimes how they work is they'll give you the drugs free. Yeah? First time they'll give it you free. Take it. Take as much as you want. Second time they might give you free as well if it's a generous drug dealer. Third time. Why? Why do they give it you free? Addiction is one answer. Addiction to attract you. You get hooked on. If the drug dealer's prices are really high, nobody's going to buy it for the first time, so you're never going to get addicted and attracted. So the drug dealer, that's it, that's psychology, that's how they work basically. They'll give it first time, free, second time free, third time he'll start charging you. And after that, once you're addicted, you can't stay without it. There's many examples. An easy example, mashallah, I can see a lot of teenagers here, is mobile phone. Yeah? Mobile phone nowadays, I think I have to put my hands up as well, we're all guilty, more or less we are addicted to our phones. Yeah? Do you know how, what's the litmus test if you are addicted or not addicted to your phone? It's the first thing you do in the morning. Your one eye is open, you've not even switched your alarm off properly yet. What do you go for? What do you reach out for? Mobile phone. I'm not going to ask and embarrass everybody who's guilty, but I put my hand up on behalf of everyone, I think, for that one. We check our phone, whether it's your WhatsApp, your Snapchat, your Instagram, Facebook, maybe some of you self-employed, it could be calls and texts, so necessary things. But we are addicted. I'll tell you another way, how you know if you're addicted to your phone, and yeah, this one, maybe it might not be a nice one to think about, but I think a lot of us do it. I think statistics say 57% of people take their mobile phone into the toilet with them. 5 minutes in the toilet, 10 minutes, maybe some kids will only spend 5 minutes in the toilet. You have to take your phone. 57%. 57 people take their phone. So why? Because we're addicted to our phones. They've made it such now, I don't think majority of people could live without a phone. I always say nowadays the phone's become like your heart. How we doctors tell us to look after your heart and protect it and go for walks and do things which reduce your blood pressure. The same way we do things to protect our phone. The covers are getting thicker and thicker, battery lives are getting longer and longer. So it's a way of addiction. Yeah, 10, 15 years ago the phones, even if they were smartphones, they weren't as good. 20, 30 years ago we had what we call the bricks, the Nokias. Yeah? From where we were then to where we are now, the gadgets, the apps on the phone. So that's another form of addiction psychology that slowly they've made us addicted to our phones. Now moving on, in terms of psychology, in terms of Islam, we believe in the mind, the body and the soul. Three things. Yeah, your mind, which involves mental issues, your body, your physical health, and your soul. So in terms of mind would be with regards to your mental health, yeah, which I'll explain in a minute inshallah. Body is not something I'm going to go too much into, but everybody knows about your body is with regards to your physical health. So how the doctors say take 5 fruit a day, drink 2 liters of water, 20-minute brisk walk, etc. Stay away from fatty foods and fizzy drinks. So that's looking after your body. All three are important, by the way, and that's why I've mentioned them. All three are important, but do we focus on all three equally? And the third one is your soul. What's your soul? How do you improve your soul? Spiritual, good, spiritual things, yeah? Coming here is spiritual, you're in a masjid, you pray salah, reading Quran, dhikr. Why I have chosen to mention these three things is sometimes people go extreme in one of these things. Often it can be the body, where they just focus on body. I need to look good. Gym goers. I'm not against gym goers. It's fantastic. If you go to the gym, work out. It's good for your health, body, physical health. It's good for your mental health. But do you only focus on physical? Or are you only going to the gym for those selfies, for Snapchat and Instagram? Then there may be a problem with your soul. Yeah, people who like to take selfies, again, not trying to judge people, but sometimes we need to look at what happens in the gym, why people go gym. There's a big influx of people going gym, mashallah, it's very good, but sometimes they don't focus on their soul. So they just like to show their biceps and triceps and six-pack and body, and I'm working out this much, but there's no focus on the third one, which is the soul. Both are important, because if you only focus on your body, mashallah, you will have a nice physique, you will look very athletic, but maybe in terms of your soul, arrogance might start creeping in, pride might start creeping in, riyah, showing off, that you're only doing this to show off to people. So all three are important. Now like I said, some people go extreme. Sometimes, believe it or not, people go extreme in the third one as well, just focusing on the soul. And you're going to say to me, how does that make sense? If I'm focusing on my soul, I want to be a good Muslim, I want to be a better Muslim, I'm coming to the masjid 3, 4, 5 times a day, praying salah, reading Quran. How can there be extremism in that? Anybody know? That people who only focus just on the soul, they don't focus on the other two, but then they can go extreme as well.
Neglect their other responsibilities.
Very good. They focus so much on Quran and Salah and Dhikr, the wife is left alone and her duties, the children are suffocating, they are maybe having mental health issues because there's no love, there's no talk, unity in the house. So even in religious terms, we do say, that's where the term religious fanatics, extremists come from, that they only focus on all day in the masjid. This is wrong. How can I prove it? Because of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. When he heard about somebody who said, I will never go to sleep, I won't sleep with my wife, I'll pray tahajjud all night. Another one said, I won't eat food. Another one said, I won't mix with my family. And when the Prophet ﷺ, he heard this, he got really angry. And he said, Inna li rabbika alayka haqqa. Your Lord has a right over you. Allah's right is that we worship Him moderately. Yeah? Inna li nafsika alayka haqqa. And your body and your soul have a right over you as well. So your body's right is that you look after your body. You don't just eat anything and everything, and you don't just keep eating. You have to look after your body as well, and that's the right of your body. وَإِنَّ لِأَهْلِكَ عَلَيْكَ حَقًّا. And your wife, your family, your children also have rights over you. So these people were Sahaba who actually said basically like a form of rahbaniyat, like monks, that we're not going to mix with our family, we're not going to eat good food, we're not going to sleep. we're just going to worship. And the Prophet ﷺ, this is in a hadith, he forbade this and he said, no, your wife has rights, your body has rights, your nafs, your soul has rights, your Lord has rights as well, and you have rights over yourself as well, which we will come on to. Because you've got to understand, if a person he is malnourished, he doesn't look after his body. If a person has psychological issues, according to me, he won't be able to worship properly as well. He won't be able to come to the masjid regular. He won't be able to sit in ta'aleem. Maybe he can't sit in programs like this because he's not looked after his body, he's not looked after himself. And that's why we say the mind, the soul and body, all three have to be balanced. And it's very important that all three are balanced. Now coming on to one of the issues is that some people mention that mental health, the founders of psychology, counseling, are all non-Muslims. It's got nothing to do with Islam. It's got nothing to do with Islam. So this is one of the purposes of today's program, is to clarify that were they founders, were they psychologists, were they people who looked into mental health in Islamic history. So one of the first names, which I'm sure many of you will have heard, young and old, is Abyssinia Ibn Sina. Ibn Sina rahmatullahi alayh was somebody who worked and looked into the mind, the body, into psychology. So many of you sometimes when you study it in universities and college, you'll have heard of the name Abyssinia. There's always a constant effort to change the Muslim names. But he was a Muslim and he studied it. Number two is Al-Kindi. Al-Kindi rahmatullahi alayh, who lived between 801 and 870. He focused a lot on dreams. Now with regards to dreams, again it involves the mind. It involves a person's state. In the Western world, somebody called Freud, he was heavily involved in dreams. Without going into too much detail, with dreams, we do say that a lot of people who have mental health issues or have psychological issues, they do get dreams. Dreams can be from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, yeah, dreams can be true, and dreams can also be from shaitan. A lot of people, sometimes people who are treated as clients as well, have paid a lot of money, hundreds of pounds, to get dreams interpreted by soothsayers, people who lie to them, especially online, on Instagram. You'll get these fraudsters. Sometimes even a whole book is written and it's not true. They say if you see a dog, this means this, if you see a lion, this means this, if you see a dead person. So be very careful with dreams. But Al-Kindi rahmatullah, he was one of those who focused on dreams. Next person is Ali bin Sahal Rabbani rahmatullah alayhi, who wrote a book called Firdausul Hikmah, the Paradise of Wisdom. It's one of the oldest encyclopedias of medicine. So he also focused in his books about psychology and counseling more on the doctor-patient relationship. Then a famous name, Imam Razi rahmatullah alayhi. I'm sure many of you will have heard the famous, he was an alim, a scholar as well, a physician, Imam Razi rahmatullah alayhi. Imam Razi wrote the largest encyclopedia in history, and he focused a lot on the mind, the body connection, disease of the heart, child development. He also writes a lot about sorrow, grief, depression. The next name is Abu Zayd Balkhi. Abu Zayd Balkhi rahmatullah alayhi. If anybody has been for counseling, you'll have heard of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. Abu Zayd Balkhi used to focus a lot on that, and he used to focus on patterns of flawed thinking. He used to focus on people who overgeneralize. So for example, a person overgeneralizing is, you failed an interview, let's say, or you went to see a girl for marriage, a girl went to see a boy for marriage, one girl said no, and then you just, I'm a failure, I can never get a job, I can never get married. It's overgeneralizing, it's overreacting. One instant, once it happened once, and you keep saying it. Another thing is, for example, you had a fallout with somebody and you just say, you know what, nobody likes me, the world against me, even if it's one fallout or two fallout. So he focused on these issues. Now the last person was Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi. So Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi is famous for his Ihya Ulumuddin. Imam Ghazali focused on the three types of nafs: nafs ammara, nafs lawwama, and nafs mutma'inna. So he focused a lot on these, connecting them to psychological issues. So in short, nafs mutma'inna is the good soul. So he mentioned the three types of nafs which are mentioned in the Quran as well. Nafs mutma'inna is a good soul, is what a person should aim to and have a goal, that in life I will develop my soul as mutma'inna. Allah mentions in the Quran, Ya ayyatuhan nafsul mutma'inna irji'i ila rabbiki radiyatan mardiyah. It's the good soul which tells you to do good. When a person has this state, he only wants to do good. This takes time and effort and dhikr and Quran and tazkiyah, for example. The second one, lawwama. Lawwama is where you're in a state where your nafs, your soul, tells you to do good, and it also tells you to do bad. It basically, lawwam, it means the critiquing soul. So it also tell you to do good and bad. The third one, ammara, nafs ammara, is mentioned in Surah Yusuf. Inna nafsa la ammaratum bisu. So nafs ammara is a person's state is so bad that nafs only tells him to do bad. So if a person feels he has that state, then he has to go through spiritual rectification. Or I mentioned tazkiyah, and it also helps the mind. A person feels at peace. The verses the Qari Sahib recited, Ala bi dhikrillahi tatma'innul qulub, that verily the soul, the heart, attain peace with the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if a person, somebody may be present here or listening, feels that I'm always inclined to do bad things, whatever the sin is, addiction, or you have evil intentions towards people, you can't control your mouth, then that person, most likely he's on the stage of nafs ammara, but there is a healing process to that. And the best way is go to an ustad or a shaykh, an imam, and take their guidance. So I mentioned that some people believe that mental health has nothing to do with Islam. These people need to know that one of the first psychiatric wards was in 705 CE in Baghdad, in Iraq, the first psychiatric ward. And I'm going to mention a bit about these psychiatric wards that they were making. And it's quite interesting because nowadays, mashallah, we do see awareness raised in this country, in the West, about mental health. But what we need to understand is, are we going about it the right way? Is this the Islamic way? So one of the things in Baghdad they provided was clean clothing. Secondly, they used to tell them to take a bath every day. Bathing every day, daily, was essential. The third thing was hot meals, but healthy food. It wasn't just any sort of food, it was nutritious food. And these three things was simply because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He's made human being, He's made insan. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes insan in the Quran, a surah which everybody will know, Surah 18, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ. Allah says, we, as in the royal noun, Allah is saying Himself, we have created mankind in the best of structures. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't make us random. He didn't put your nose in the middle for any reason. He didn't put your eyes placed on the right and left of your nose for any reason. He didn't put your hands and arms and feet here for any reason. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying about the human being, and this is why human being is the best of Allah's creation, because Allah made us in the best of structures. Another verse, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ وَحَمَلْنَاهُمْ فِي الْبَرِّ وَالْبَحْرِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, when we made Bani Adam, the sons of Adam, we honored him, we gave him respect. Now we need to ask ourselves, do we respect ourselves? Or the question is, how do we respect ourselves? Anybody know? How does a person respect themselves or their body? Look after it. In what way? Keep fit. Very good. Very good. And that's why I mentioned these three things that they had in the psychiatric wards in Baghdad: clean clothing, hot meals, and bathing daily, was to look after themselves. They weren't just in smelly beds with smelly clothes and just give them anything. These were the first three things mentioned. Also, these psychiatric wards were located in the middle of the town or city. Why do you think they would do that? Why would they not put them in the countryside? Why would they not put them in the outskirts of a town or city? Why locate them in the middle? Think mentally, psychologically. Sorry?
Human interaction.
Very good. Human interaction, so people can come and see them. If they were in the countryside miles away, who's going to go? Someone's going to go once a week. If they put them in the middle of the town or city, maybe people will come and see them every day. Human interaction was very important. It was not to isolate them. Around these psychiatric wards and buildings, they put gardens, they planted trees and plants and greenery. And I'm sure everybody knows why they would do that. It was to improve their mood. They would make them go for walks, and also they would have fountains and springs, water. And then one of the final things is they had companions or helpers called murafikun. Murafikun, who were they? You could say in today's day and age like chaplains. Yeah? they would come and ask their well-being. They would make a dua for them, make them smile, talk to them, laugh with them, joke with them. They would look after them. So these, basically there was a lot of human interaction, and these psychiatric wards were thought out. It wasn't just made anywhere, chuck them in, get them in and out like a conveyor belt. This is something I think maybe in this country and in the West we need to think of. Maybe having these Islamic psychiatric wards again. So again, if Muslims were making this, how can anybody say that there was no mental health issues back then? And this was in 705. And one of the other things I think which is an important part is they weren't made to feel like outcasts. They weren't made to feel bad. And I'm going to use a word in Urdu, maybe Gujarati, because often this word is used for these sort of people and for psychiatric was pagal khana. Ya wo pagal khana mein gaya, ya wo pagal ho gaya. The word is a very derogatory word, it's a very disrespectful word. And this is why when you say to somebody who's maybe suffering anxiety or depression or trauma, wo to pagal ho gaya. It's the worst word you could use. Never use that word. Never use that word. And the proof is here. How they made these people feel that they were getting better. They empowered them. They didn't make them feel like they were mental or pagal. So in our community, one of the reasons people don't go for counselling and don't address mental health issues, they want to teach themselves and tell themselves, I'm okay. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm not mental. I don't need counselling. In order to need counselling or go for counselling or seek therapy and help, you don't have to be mental or pagal. Now we're going to move on swiftly, inshallah, to some of the myths about mental health. And on that note, if anybody has any questions, I think they didn't mention at the start that you can ask questions. Either write them down, inshallah, and just send them forward, or text them to, inshallah, by Noshad, just so we know in terms of time. If there are any questions, anybody's listening online, they can text them in as well. So the first myth about mental health is that mental health issues only occur in white people, European people. Okay? Why do people say this? Is because mainly the founders of counselling, psychotherapy, psychology were white. People like Freud, Carl Rogers, Aaron Beck, they were white. I've also mentioned to you the Muslims researchers as well. So it's not limited to white people. Maybe because we ignore it and there's not enough education, but it doesn't just exist in white people. Secondly is, how am I going to get better by talking to somebody? Because often when people have mental health issues, psychological issues, we refer them to counselling. Counselling, or nowadays coaching. So what's the point in talking? What's the point in talking? Now, some people think, just swallow the bitter pill and it'll get better. Whatever's happening, whatever's going through your life, whether it's divorce, death of your parents, grandparents, trauma, depression, and particularly men more than women, we just think, you know what, be a man, suck it up and it'll be okay. What's talking going to do? Or they often say about counsellors, oh, the counsellor only listens, because some counsellors don't give advice as such. You've got to understand, as counsellors, when you are a counsellor, you listen impartially. We are non-judgmental. And I'm going to give a hadith on this, about this. And I give this hadith because as an alim, this hadith stood out to me as well. I heard it in a talk of a brother who was talking about counselling and psychological issues, and he started with this hadith. And he mentioned the hadith, many of you will have heard, that a man came to the Prophet ﷺ, Abu Umama radiallahu anhu narrates, a man came to the Prophet ﷺ, a youngster, and he wanted to commit a sin. The sin was no ordinary sin, the sin was fornication, zina. In other words, he wanted to have sexual intercourse with a ghair mahram, without nikah. This is in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. Many youngsters maybe also go through these dilemmas. But I will mention the psychological and counseling aspect after the hadith has been narrated. So the Prophet ﷺ, first thing, what did he say? You're going to hell, you Jahannami, how dare you, did he beat him up? The Prophet ﷺ, the mercy to the world, brought him forward. He said, oh youngster, come here, come. Lesson number one. He didn't judge him. So that's why I say, when people say, what's the point in counselling? We offer this service. We're not allowed to judge. Counsellors are not allowed to give you a verdict. Jannat or Jahannam, you're going to die, you're going to live. The Prophet ﷺ was the greatest counsellor. Secondly, he said to him, my dear beloved youngster, you want to commit this act. How would you feel if somebody committed zina, fornication with your mother? So the youngster said, I would hate it. People wouldn't want somebody to do that. The Prophet ﷺ further questioned, how would you feel if somebody committed this act with your sister? Same answer. Because I would hate it, I would dislike it. As somebody committed zina with my sister, how dare you? The third question, how would you feel if somebody committed this act with your auntie? Your mom's sister, your dad's sister? Because I would be angry. So the Prophet ﷺ very softly and gently advised him, dear brother, in the like manner, this girl who you want to have zina with, haram relationship with, she is also the daughter of a father. She also has brothers. And as you dislike it for your own mother and sister, in the same way, how do you think her father would feel, her brother would feel? Then the Prophet ﷺ, he made dua for him. Yeah, the third point, he made dua for him. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala purify his heart and guard his chastity. This man leaves the masjid. On walking out, he sees a woman and he told the companions around him, when I came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there was no act more beloved to me than zina, fornication. I just wanted to do it. That's why I say many youth will face this dilemma. How do we respond to it and how do we deal to it? After I have met Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there is no act more disliked to me than zina. And he didn't commit this act. This hadith is mentioned often in counseling. It's because this is how a counselor is meant to be. This is how an imam is meant to be. This is how maybe mothers and fathers should behave as well. That when your son or your daughter comes to you with a dilemma, do not become judge, jury and executioner and send them to Jahannam. Your child will never speak to you again. So when people say to me, oh Maulana, what's the point of counseling? You guys only talk, you only listen. This is the hadith we give. That the Prophet ﷺ, he advised him in such a way that this man hated the act. We also have people who have drug addiction, alcohol addiction, gambling addiction, many other addictions. Our job is non-judgmental. We are not even allowed to say to them that you are sinful or you are this, you are that. They know the sin. They know the sin, that's why they come to us. So one of the myths is what you get by talking to somebody, you're offloading. You're releasing some energy. And we all know offloading helps. I'll give you a very quick example, then we'll move on to the next one inshallah. Okay. Is that, for example, tomorrow's Monday, Monday, busy day of the week. Generally, any day you can come home if you have a busy job. You come home, you're frustrated. You might come home with some work colleagues, or you come home with your wife or husband. What do people tend to do after work? Eat, have a brew, and often doing that, they offload, they rant. Oh, today I had this customer, she was that X, Y, Z. Oh, this guy come and he was this, that. That's offloading. Yeah, generally people do it, whether you call that counseling, offloading, sharing problems, it's an everyday thing for most of us. Maybe women do it more, men do it less, but we all do it. Why do people do this? It's because they get it off their chest. It's the same with counseling. With counseling, we offer you an impartial space where you will not be judged. If someone still says to me after all this explaining, it's useless, mate, then I'm going to say to you, sometimes, especially young children, the teenagers will maybe understand, under 16, how many times have you complained to your mum or dad, and I'm not saying all parents are bad that they do this, or even your siblings, your elder siblings, I got this problem, somebody's bullying me, and they've judged you. They've commented something you didn't like. Well, you know what, that's your problem. It's not my problem, you deal with it. It's your fault in the first place. And you feel you have not been heard impartially. They've not judged you fairly. It could happen between siblings when you're younger, you have a lot of fights and squabbles. Mum, this happened, dad, this happened. Mum and dad don't listen. Oh, be quiet and go to your room. Yeah, once or twice it's okay, it's happened to all of us. When it keeps happening, it builds up. And this is what we call childhood trauma. Childhood trauma. that people who never got heard, when you come for counseling, we hear you, we listen to you. Okay, if anybody has questions, inshallah, they can text this number 07794461185. The number again 07794461185, inshallah. Any questions? Try to avoid personal scenarios. Sometimes in these programs people have put their own issue or story. Maybe with something like that you can speak to me afterwards, because that will get very long. But if it's a specific question, inshallah you can text. Jazakallah. The next one is you are weak. If you have mental health issues or therapy, you are weak. This one's big for the men, because we're macho men, aren't we? We're alpha males. We are strong. We can't suffer mental health issues. You're a weakling. You're a coward. Stop crying and get over it. So if mental health issues make you weak, let me ask you, the verse at the start of the khutbah I said was a verse from Surah Yusuf with regards to Yaqub alayhi salam when he lost his son. Yusuf alayhi salam went missing for almost 30-40 years as a young boy. When they meet again, the end of Surah Yusuf, Yusuf alayhi salam, the grown mature man, 30-40 years, Yaqub alayhi salam, he kept crying. The Quran says, وَابْيَضَّتْ عَيْنَاهُ مِنَ الْحُزْنِ فَهُوَ كَظِيمٌ. Literal translation is his eyes whitened from grief, which basically means he lost his eyesight. Have you known any parent out of grief and loss of their son or daughter, they cried so much they became blind? I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I'm just saying, do you know somebody? Do you know somebody living in this day and age who lost a baby or a miscarriage or a stillborn, or their child got run over a car and they lost them in young age and they cried so much they went blind? That man is Yaqub alayhi salam. The story is in the Quran. So who's to say that mental health therapy, mental health issues for cowards and weaklings? The best of people, the Anbiya alayhi salam, had also grief and depression and suffering. The next example is the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam himself. If you read the seerah, there is a whole chapter called Amul Huzn. What is Amul Huzn? The year of grief. Not a day of grief, not a week of grief, not a month of grief. A whole year of grief. What happened in that year? The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he lost his most beloved wife, his supporter, the one he cherished the most, the one who he loved the most. Khadija radiallahu anha died. All the children of the Prophet ﷺ were from Khadija radiallahu anha. He says about Khadija radiallahu anha, I love her because she was there for me when nobody else was there. Who was the first believer in Islam? The first woman to accept Islam. When in Ghar Hira, the Prophet ﷺ got revelation and he was panicking. Zammiluni, Zammiluni. He came home to whom? His wife. His wife comforted him and he said, Allah will not disgrace you. The Prophet ﷺ lost his supporter, number one supporter. Number two, Abu Talib. Abu Talib, even though he wasn't a Muslim, he also died in the same year. I'm giving this example because of what I mentioned. In the years of lockdown 2020, 2021, maybe you lost your wife, your husband, your father, mother. Some people had 2-3 deaths. Death is not easy. Getting over grief is not easy. The Prophet ﷺ, if you feel sad, you are not a bad Muslim. If you feel depression, you are not a bad Muslim. If you suffered anxiety, you are not a bad Muslim. The Prophet ﷺ in Seerah, he mentions Amul Huzn. The whole year the Prophet ﷺ was low and down. There are other examples as well. When Hamza radiallahu anhu became shaheed, the Prophet ﷺ was very upset. So this shows that mental health issues are not just for women or just for cowards or just for weak people. Next objection is counseling negates trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you go for counseling, you don't have tawakkul. If you don't go for counseling, you're not a good Muslim. If you don't go for counseling, you've got weak faith. So how do we answer this? I answer it in such a way that if counseling, for example, negates trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that would mean going to the doctors is against tawakkul. Yeah, everybody go doctors here? If you go to a doctor, you must not have tawakkul then, according to these people. Any sort of therapy, whether it's ruqya, it's hijama, it's counseling, going to the doctors, going to a hakim, it's what we call the means, the asbab. 50% of your life should be tawakkul. That 50% we know Allah gives shifa. 50% is using the means. Yeah? the what I call jahil's tawakkul, the ignorant people's tawakkul, is you don't go doctor, you don't go for hijama, you don't go for ruqya, you don't go for any sort of therapy. Bas ghar baithe raho, shifa milegi aapko asman se. The Prophet ﷺ also sought out ways of ruqya and hijama and therapy in the time. In that time, the best of people. So it doesn't negate trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It reminds me of a story in the time of Umar radiallahu anhu. Umar radiallahu anhu walked past some people. It was daytime and they were sat in the masjid. So he was thinking, what's this group of people? Listen, as big as this group. Daytime, Monday to Friday, you just sat here. So he's obviously thinking, these people have no jobs. What do they do? Where's the wife and kids? So he said, what are you guys doing? نَحْنُ مُتَوَكِّلُونَ. We are the people who trust in Allah. Umar radiallahu anhu with his character, what did he say? No, you are mutawakilun. You are lazy people. You don't have trust in Allah. Get out, get a job, and then you have tawakkul on Allah. This maybe is a hint and insinuation for people who maybe don't work and rely on benefits unjustly, who are not really worthy of benefits, but they just take advantage of the benefit system. There are people who need the benefits, there are people who need the income, who have disabilities, no problem. But I'm sure you know anybody who works for HMRC, DW, if you will agree with me, there's a lot of people who take advantage of this system as well. So this goes against Islam. All the prophets worked for their money, worked hard. Now some myths with specifically regards to men. One of them is, why can't you go out and get help? So a lot of men, when you tell them why can't you go out and get help, what they tend to say is, I'm strong, I don't need help. But if you look at their issues, their marriages are breaking, their children are all over the place, they can't attend job daily. So one of the things men say is, I don't need any help. There is no harm in getting help. Second one, I think we've already mentioned, is counseling is just for women. A lot of the founders of counseling and psychotherapy are men. I've mentioned them, Freud, Rogers, Muslim World, they're all men. So it's a bit like I say sometimes, some of the world's top chefs, they're men. Yeah, the world's top chefs are men. Who does the cooking in the house? So it's the same here. The founders of counseling are men, but if you look at all the counseling clinics, they're full of women. More female counselors than men. Another problem is some men are in denial. I don't have a problem. There's nothing wrong with me. I put it down to, whether we like it or not, it's male ego. It's male ego because I'll be honest, in my line of work, it's generally men who deny it. When we tell them they have a problem, whether it's a spiritual problem, physical or psychological, anything, they always deny it. And a lot of men deny it. I'm not talking about one or two. If it was one or two men, I wouldn't say. A lot of men deny it, and it's hard. It's like squeezing blood out of a stone. We've got to persuade them and get them to believe in it. So you've got to look at your life. If you've got issues, you're a drug addict, alcohol addict, then you need to look at your life and why you have these problems. Okay, Brother Nosh, have you got some questions through? Are they here, yeah? How many are there? Two questions. Okay, I'll finish up inshallah and then we will go through the questions. Now I'm going to quickly mention a bit about some issues that people have. One is depression, sadness, and the other one is anxiety, and then inshallah we will go through some of the questions. So sometimes people mention they don't know the difference between depression and sadness. It's a big difference. Depression can be long term. So for example, if a person has sadness, maybe he had a car crash, maybe he lost his business, maybe he died, it's more short term. You didn't go to work for a few days, you can't sleep for a few days, you're not talking to anybody. Depression needs to be treated. Depression is a person, he's not sleeping at all, and that's every day. A person doesn't go to work for weeks and weeks and weeks, he doesn't talk to anybody. So this, you can get clinical depression, this person, he needs to seek medical help. Whereas sometimes with sadness, you can overcome it yourself by talking to somebody, maybe counseling, some sort of therapy. With anxiety, anxiety is very common. Anxiety, the first I mentioned at the start, more or less, most people go through some sort of anxiety in their life. The verse I mentioned, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي كَبَدٍ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that I created mankind in constant hardship. Whether that's your work, that's your spouse, your children, your neighbor, your work colleague, everybody goes through some sort of anxiety. Even if you look at Musa alayhi salam, when he went to Fir'aun, the biggest tyrant of the time, what did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say? لَا تَخَافَ. لَا تَخَافَ. Do not be scared. Do not have anxiety, because they were going against the biggest tyrant. And I give these examples of the prophets because people who are in denial need to look. You are not greater than the prophets. The prophets could have had anxiety and fear. One dua I tend to give for anxiety, famous dua, and you can write it down or maybe ask the Imam Sahib will tell you. Allahumma la sahla illa ma ja'altahu sahla wa anta taj'alul hazna idha shi'ta sahlan. Recite this dua. Other things which help is things like going for walks, breathing exercises, massages, hijama. These sort of things help with anxiety. I mentioned depression and anxiety is most people ask about these two. The final thing I'm going to mention, which is a general thing for people who may be suffering mental health, or maybe they've just lost direction in life, lost hope. 4 ways to overcome helplessness and despair. The first is remember the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is He loves you 70 times more than your own mother. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that Lord. The hadith of the Prophet ﷺ says all of mankind, meaning from Adam alayhi salam to the last person, stood on a plain, a land. Every single person, Muslim, Kafir, asked me for one thing, for 100 things. I will give every person his need. It will not diminish anything from my treasures. This is your Lord who you're asking from. So you have to understand the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Seek Allah's forgiveness. Number 3, sometimes spiritual issues especially can be from shaitan. Shaitan is weak. Inna kayda shaitani kana da'ifa. Shaitan's plot is weak. Sometimes we overcome with waswasa and thoughts and OCD, etc. And the last thing is think good of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whatever you have, whether it's mental health issues, physical health issues, you're going through depression, divorce, death of a near one, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَنَا عِنْدَ ظَنِّ عَبْدِ بِي, I am as my servant thinks of me. If you believe, Allah will give you shifa. Wallahi, Allah will give you shifa. But if you always think, nahi, mar jayenge, bahut bimari hai, cancer hai, yo hai, then Allah knows best whether you're going to survive it and become a victim or you're going to become a survivor. Always think good of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala no matter what your situation is. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the ability to benefit from what's been said, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give all those who are suffering mukammal shifa. Okay, so the first question is, why is mental health hidden in our culture? I think some of the things I've mentioned is one of the reasons is because it's not talked about, and it needs to be talked about from the masjids. Why? The masjid is a hub of the community. It's for everybody. A masjid is not just for salah and fasting, etc. A masjid is a place to educate the people. I mentioned those psychiatric wards in Baghdad. These were made by Islamic scholars and researchers. These weren't ordinary people. So that's the first part of the question. And the second part of the question is, what support is there? So you can get in touch. One of the things I was going to mention by answering this question is, mashallah, we've got here Brother Asif. Asif is, mashallah, your local resident. He started an organization recently called Offload. Mashallah, I like the name because I mentioned about offloading. So Offload, it started as a men's club every Monday night, 7 till 9, St. Paul's Church. Is that what's it called? St. Paul's Church, next to the Jan's Hall. Anybody's welcome over 16? Yeah, anybody over 16, men are welcome. You can come, it's free of charge. Everything's, over 18. Over 18, everything is kept confidential. I've attended myself to support Asif as well, mashallah. It's a very good group. Mashallah, there's refreshments, tea and coffee available every Monday. If you want more details, he has got a banner outside. So the person who's asked what facilities are available in Blackburn, that's one thing. There's another post I put up in the masjid with regards to Samaritans. Samaritans is a very good organization, very confidential, offer a lot of support, again a free service. There's many Muslim counsellors, male and female. So inshallah, if someone needs specific help, they can get in touch with the Imams and Brother Noshad here, and inshallah I will give more details or signpost them. The next question, can you ask this question if it's possible, is Maulana aware of any courses of spiritual healing? So in terms of spiritual healing, you can get courses. On my website I've put things of like self-ruqya, how to learn ruqya yourself. There's many talks of mine. So if you put my name into YouTube, inshallah you will see it. There's many other scholars as well who have courses and programs. Maulana mentioned keeping up with routine during depression, but what if you can't return to your routine because your work schedule has changed? You can't return to how things were because of the damage your depression has caused. Okay, so I think with this one it's probably a more long-term thing, and that's why I said if it's a personal thing, inshallah, whoever's asked that question, Maybe I will reply to Brother Noshad later. What is the best, most effective way of increasing tawakkul? So I mentioned about tawakkul, yeah? You get people who don't use the means. They don't go for counseling, they don't even go doctors. We saw these people in the lockdown. Positive for corona, I'm not isolating, I'm not wearing a mask. Tawakkul, that is ignorance. Ignorance is jahalat, is people who are jahil. So you need 50% tawakkul, 50% use the means. Tawakkul can be increased in many ways. Read up about tawakkul. Look at yourself, that when a situation occurs, who do you look at? There are also some people who only use the means as well. That's wrong. So 100% on the means. They forget Allah, they forget Quran, they forget dua. That's wrong. If a person does that, I would say he has no tawakkul. You are fully relying on the means. An example I tend to give is two people have a migraine. Two people have a migraine, A and B. Two people both take the paracetamol. A got cured, B didn't get cured. Anybody know why A got cured? Why did A get cured? Sorry?
He believed in the cure.
Very good. He believed in the cure, but what did he believe about the cure? The shifa is from? So both of them had a migraine, both of them took the tablet. One believed, B said, paracetamol will cure me. Doctor Buhara, ye doctor bahut acha hai, he's going to get me better. He didn't get cured. Allah is teaching him a lesson. Person A, he got cured, उसने बिस्मिल्लाह बोला, दवा गोली ली, और फिर अल्लाह ने उसको शिफा दी. क्यों? Because he believed Allah will cure me. The paracetamol is only a means. 50% tawakkul and 50% using the means. So ways of increasing tawakkul or checking your tawakkul is when you have problems, any problems, medical, physical, money problems, do you first turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The hadith is famous, but it's absolutely, I'd say, vanished in this day and age, is extinct. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he would be faced with problems and anxiety, where would he turn? To the Qibla, put the musalla down and 2 rak'ats. Tell me who does this, tell me. Seriously, tell me, I want to meet the person who does this every time he faces a problem. He puts musalla down, 2 rak'ats. That's hadith. Every single one of you know this hadith. It's mentioned again and again in books of Ta'aleem, Fadali Amal. That's the first thing. That shows you've got tawakkul. If you can't pray 2 rak'ats, make dua. Pray durood sharif, do istighfar. That means you've got tawakkul. If you're not doing this, you're not giving sadaqah, you're not turning to the masjid, you're just relying on the means, that's a weakness of faith, that's a weakness in tawakkul. So hopefully that answers the question of tawakkul. Anybody here got a question they want to quickly ask before we end off? Nobody, inshallah. Noshad, is that all the questions done? One more, okay. All done, yeah? Okay, Jazakallah khairan to everyone for attending, Jazakallah for the masjid for catering for this program. And if like I said, if anybody's got personal issue or requires detail, inshallah, they can meet me after the food, inshallah. Definitely have food, inshallah, the food's here. So all brothers can stay, Jazakallah khairan.
Upstairs.
Okay, children under 16 upstairs and adults here. Subhanallah bihamdi, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika wa nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.